Start over. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the meeting of the Barrie Police Service Board for October 16, 2025. I'd like to call the meeting to order and begin with our land acknowledgement. In keeping with Indigenous protocol and building respectful relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in Canada, it is customary to acknowledge the traditional territories and ancestral lands of Indigenous peoples. We would like to acknowledge this sacred land on which the Barrie Simcoe Emergency Service Campus operates. It has been the site for human activity for 15,000 years. This land is the ancestral land of the Wendat and Anishinaabe Nation. The treaty that was signed for this particular parcel of land is collectively referred to as the Williams Treaty. We are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture. We also recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land and are committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect. Thank you. Our agenda was distributed in advance. A motion to approve today's agenda. Deputy Mayor Thompson, any questions, comments, amendments to today's agenda? Seeing none, those in favor? Thank you. Any member have any conflict of interest they see at this time with respect to today's agenda? Seeing none, thank you. There are two sets of minutes distributed in advance. A motion to approve the minutes of our September 19th, 2025 public board meeting. Mr. Khan. Deputy Mayor Thompson, any amendments, adjustments, questions with respect to those minutes? Seeing none, those in favor? Thank you. A motion to approve the minutes from our September 22nd, 2025 special budget meeting. Mr. Khan. Any questions, amendments, etc., with respect to those minutes? Seeing none, those in favor? Thank you. Chief, I'll hand it over to you to introduce our team with respect to an update on the triannual statistics.
Thank you, Chair. The board's very well familiar with our organizational research room, Madison Sharman. She'll speak to that, and appreciating we pride ourselves on being as transparent as possible and letting data drive our operational decisions for the most part.
Welcome.
Long time no see. All right. Good morning, board. Sarah, you're okay if I just kind of next slide it for you? Okay, awesome. So today we're going to talk about our triannual stats. So this period is specifically looking at summer. So we were supposed to present in September, and we're now presenting a little bit late in October. But nonetheless, we're going to be talking about our summer period compared to summer 2024 and year round for 2024. So first, we're going to talk about our statistics, looking specifically at our three measurements that we talk about. So our calls for service, our harm, and our crime. Then we're going to do a quick update on our harm spot update and then move into what's been going on with Hexagon. So just as a reminder to the board and the public, when we look at crime and when we measure public safety, the more data points we have, the better picture that we're able to paint. So here we use CAD created events. That is all the calls that come in through our communication system, and our lovely communicators triage all of those and deal with all of that volume. Then those turn into what we categorize as criminal events or crime counts, and then social disorder. So those calls for service that don't have a criminal component to it, but often take up a lot of police resources. And then we go down our crime harm. That's our weighted harm score that we use. That's derived from our UCRs that come from our crime counts. So that's the mapping of our various state levels. So let's talk about CAD created events. We did have a busy summer compared to the last couple summer periods. And we're going to talk about why next. Awesome. So when we look at our proportion, and I think this really speaks volumes, and this is a really interesting finding from this summer, our emergency calls for service are at 24%. So that's that priority 0, priority 1 is what we consider. Last year, for 2024 as a whole, it was 27%. And one of the biggest findings we've seen from this summer period is that our proactive calls So that priority for proactive administrative is sitting at 36% of our call volume. That's huge. That's actually a 10% increase from last summer. So we're really increasing our proactive effort. A lot of this, when digging into the calls, has to do with our special constables downtown, a lot of proactive work happening downtown and citywide. So we're really seeing that reflected in our stats, with the proportion of our calls for service being primarily focused on that proactive. That's huge. So when we look at our event types, so see how now community services have moved into our number one voluminous type. Last summer, it was at 3.78%. So that is quite a significant jump, and it's now our most voluminous call for service. So again, speaking to a lot of those investments and our work as a service and a board of identifying our priorities with that proactive work is huge. The other pieces, police assistant, traffic stop, motor vehicle, those are all business as usual. We don't see those change very often. A small proportion will go up 1% or down 1%, but those are staying relatively consistent. The biggest finding is the change in the community service really jumping up there. So when we look at our harm, as the board is well familiar with, we use the Canadian Crime Severity Index and attach the weight to all of our crimes. And this is developed out of Stats Canada, and it's based out of days in prison times actual incarceration rates for this offense. So police do not influence this weight at all. It comes to us from Stats Canada and is nationally applicable. So when we look at our maps, these are really key because when we talk about how we inform deployment based on different data types, right? So first we have our CAD, so that volume, that mainly drives our engagement teams. And for example, our specialized team this summer of the downtown special constables, right? So this kind of data, this volume data is what really drives more of our engagement teams. We then see our crime counts. That's again based on volume, but good for us to know where criminal events are occurring. And then finally, we see our harm this summer. And that is what really directs our uniform presence, our proactive patrols in those harm spots that we've been doing the last couple of years. So as you see, it looks different. And when you look on the next slide, when we look at our harm composition changes over time as well, right? So we are seeing, I mean, as a bit of a spoiler, yes, we have our lowest harm summer right now since 2021. However, what you can see is that composition does change, right? When we're looking at severity. So that's what we continuously monitor, and we're able to direct our officers to those various spots. So when we look at our proportions of harm, these have remained fairly similar to 2024 numbers. Community reported taking up the biggest chunk of our harm at 67%, because that is the category that has the highest harm scores. That's kind of where our quote unquote worst or bad things really sit. Then we have our proactive. Our proactive is sitting at 24%. That is about the same, give or take about 2% as our 2024 numbers. That is again work influenced by great officer work, proactive work, things they find prior to them moving into kind of that harmful against person category. And then our commercially detected, and this is worth noting, our commercial crime and our commercial harm continues to increase. And I do want to warn, right, this is why we break things out, is commercial crime can be influenced by loss prevention officers, reporting rates, easier to report online now. So I don't want us to assume a true increase. We continue to monitor this, but our commercial crime harm is increasing and has increased by about 3% from last year. So when we look at our specific breakdown by trend, so like I mentioned, commercial is sitting at about 9%, but you can see year over year that harm score has increased. So that's something for us to work on, continue to monitor, and consider evidence-based approaches to potentially tackle that, or work with partners to see what that looks like. Our community reported harm in the red is at its lowest proportion that we've seen over the last 5 years. This is really promising. Again, our commercially reported harm, or our community reported harm, is things like assaults, robberies, things that often involve a person victim. So we're continuing to monitor that. And then our proactive harm is sitting, at that 55,000 mark, pretty much the same as this last year period, slightly lower than a couple other years. So just something to keep an eye on. When we look at our community reported harm drivers, so what is driving group of 5, just as they kind of intertangle. Some will beat the other out of the top spot. So break and enter was our number 1. Fraud has jumped into our number 1 again. So seeing fraud taking up nearly 16% of our harm, but 7% of our counts. Break and enter taking up nearly 11% of our harm, but 2% of our counts. Sexual assault taking up 9% of our harm, but 1% of our counts. Theft under, again, being a really interesting one because that one is more driven by volume, right? So you can see that on this graph. We're at 6% of our harm, which is a high proportion, but 9% of our counts because we do see quite a lot of it. And then lastly, robbery taking up about 6% of our harm and 1% of our crime count. And again, I always kind of mention this, right, when you think of chief in the hot seat, navigating these various priorities as a police service, right? We have finite resources, and here we have, in a way, kind of conflicting priorities, right? We have our harm drivers and what we know is driving harm in our community, but we also have our volume drivers, which is driving a lot of our police resource and a lot of our police time. So continuing to get creative, to look at alternative response models, alternative deployment to kind of target some of those pieces that continuously take up a lot of police time, but could be seen as lower risk and lower harm in comparison to some of these harm drivers. So when we look at our proactive harm drivers, again, these are things that our officers often catch prior to them then moving into that red category, right? So bail violations works through proactive. Possession of weapons, breach of probation, and then various trafficking charges. So again, what we're seeing here is often these are higher on our harm scale, lower on our count scale, specifically the possessions of weapons being a big one. I will say, I believe last year possession of weapons was our highest proactive driver, and that's now switched to bail violation. And I know we've done some evidence-based projects of offender management and really having that proactive work of our high harm teams and things like that can increase the charges in that work. So again, that's why we break that out. It's not that there's more or less bail violations. It's us as a service have dedicated more resources to finding that, which therefore kind of increases those rates. And again, looking at commercial crime trends. So this starting from January 2024. Last year we saw it calm down a little bit over the summer, but this year we're seeing it jump and continuing to jump during the summer. So we're going to continue monitoring this during the summer months, and as we move into the winter months to see what's going on, and as the team start considering different projects that we can do to work with our partners and eventually tackle this as we continuously see this increase. So I do want to talk about our harm spot project. So something we've been doing with our frontline for about the last 2 years. This has been a very address specific target. So we've looked at our data and we've targeted addresses in our community that are showing consistent high harm. We've had 7 consistent over the past 2 years. And we're now moving into more of a hexagon or an area deployment. But I did want to talk about the great work that our officers have done. So through our proactive hotspot checks, we've been able to see an average harm decrease of 48% in our targeted 7 areas. And I will also note that when we look at additional addresses, no other address have increased or have kind of shot up past the baselines of these addresses. So we're not seeing new, more harmful spots. We're seeing a calming effect here. Also, of course, looking at the other measures other than harm, we have seen crime count decrease and we have seen calls for service on average decrease. And again, that really speaks to officer time as well and how frequently they're being called to that area. So this is a really big success. And as we move forward, we're looking at more of a hexagon deployment. So understanding that our data is only as good as it can be and recognizing some blind spots as we work forward. Sometimes things happen on a street outside of an address and don't actually have a viable city linked address, but we have an X and Y coordinate. So we're focusing more on our mapping to increase our accuracy. So that's where we've come into this hexagon deployment model, looking at more of a specified area. If you want to hit the next 2, because I think there we go. So like I mentioned, something can happen on the street or outside of an address or in a catwalk, and that just complicates our address data. So what we've been doing, and Sam, our crime analyst, has been mapping our data and then clustering it in, kind of digestible sized hexagons. And we're now focusing on these hexagons rather than an address specific for our officers. So next slide. So we always see crime concentration. That is confirmed in research, confirmed in data, regardless if it's people, places, victims, what have you. There is crime is very heavily concentrated, and harm is even more concentrated. So when we looked at our hexagons after we broke our city up into 300-meter hexagons, we did see this as well. So 20% of our harm occurred at 0.6 hexagons across the city. So it's a lot easier to target resources at 0.6% of our hexagons than all of them, which I believe goes into the 1800s. So there's quite a few. So from this, we looked at our data and brought basically a list of statistically significant harmful or hotspot hexagons to an operational table and worked together to select 8 final target areas that we're asking our frontline to monitor. That is citywide, and then our entire service, all platoons and engagement team are looking at specific spots downtown that we've also sanctioned out. So we broke our city into 2 pieces, our citywide and our downtown. That's because we're treating 2 very different areas. The spatial density, the complexity of the downtown is different than our residential areas. And just so we have a little bit more precision in there, we've broken our city in the downtown to smaller hexagons. So all platoons, including our engagement team, have been given this data. It's a full service approach to our downtown. And then by platoon, we have various platoons looking at certain hexagons as we go. So as a service and as a team, led by Sergeant McKibben, we went and did platoon visits the last couple of weeks. So officer briefings in the morning, shared with them the data, the trends. Sam puts together very detailed intel reports so the officers have this information at their fingertips and know what they're walking into at these various hexagons. And we've encouraged them to look at creative ways to target these. So of course, continuously being visible, but also POP projects. So this is something that has been very heavily talked about in research, is these problem-oriented policing projects, right? So once you go in and you know there's an issue, giving it a deeper dive, and there's been a lot of different examples of success that we've shared with our officers as examples, and we're encouraging them to continue to do this proactive work to target some of those problem spots that we're seeing to prevent harm. But that's everything for me. Happy for me and the team to take questions.
Questions from that? And team, yeah, start with.
You and thank you for the presentation of the great information. One of the questions that I had is the way that we separate the like the purple is the proactive and the red is the community reported, and then you show us as far as that. But if we have, say, for the proactive weapons and drug trafficking, like, do we also have those in the community reported, or are we only finding those in proactive?
So those are only proactive. So the categories are exclusive to that. So our drug trafficking offenses and possession offenses are all proactive. Our possession of weapon offenses is all proactive. Now, if you use a firearm in a connection offense, if you charge somebody with it, that then goes to community.
Okay, if I could just follow up on the first more clarity, if I am a person and my neighbor, I think it's trafficking, and then I call the police to say my neighbor's a drug trafficker, that is still proactive?
That is still proactive. So what we had to do is make decisions on what and how it most likely comes in. So we had to kind of make those hard decisions where, yes, drug trafficking can be reported by the community. However, we can influence its detection through proactive efforts. So it was kind of what's the lesser evil? What side do we put it on? So we made the decision to keep it in proactive.
Oh, yeah. And if I may, Chair, one other question. This question is related to the hotspot, the hexagon, and I'm wondering how we chose 8.
So we basically started with, I think there was about 1,800 citywide, and then narrowed it down to a list of 50 hexagons individually that were statistically significant. So they were about 3 standard deviations from what we would like to see. They were kind of really out there. So from that list of 50, we brought it to an operational table, because what happens is sometimes an anomaly happens and it's a very targeted high harm crime in one area. but it doesn't make sense for our frontline teams to continuously monitor that area, knowing that that's not really a problem spot all the time. One bad thing happened there and it's over and it was targeted, and that's something we can move on from. So what we did is we took those spots, hexagons that were beside each other, we clustered. So when I say 8, some of them are a single hexagon, some of them are 1 or 2 together as a cluster. But it was a mix of like those data-driven insights and then what's operationally feasible is how we narrowed it down to 8. We wanted to pick 4 for platoon 1 and 3, and then 4 for platoon 2 and 4, because we also didn't want to overload them with too many hexagons. So we figured that was a good kind of starting point. We'll work with those and then.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to you and your team. Again, informative. My question is two-stage, and you had a slide that referred to the harm and crime count for the gray and red bars. Recognizing that previously you mentioned the percentage of members of the public who contribute to the harm, for example, is a very small that contributes to the largest amount of the 20% of your incidents. Given that information, are you tracking what percentage of the farm is also repeating under basically?
Yes. So what we've been looking at too specifically with back when Staff Sergeant Fitzgerald was in charge and the SNAP, we know that crime is very concentrated across offenders as well. I believe my last recollection of the number, I think, is within the 22, but it was 20% of the harm is concentrated by 1.6% of the offenders. And in Barrie, we're lucky to have a pretty small offender pool to begin with, so it is a very concentrated group of people. And we do often see those individuals who have perpetrated that having had a criminal history. So for that, we looked specifically at increasing officer interaction with those individuals for higher team with respect to SNAP. So that was one way we kind of recognized that pattern in our data and seen how we can work it. And we did notice in the group that had officer visits that they had less recidivism and less harmful recidivism. So if they did reoffend, it was a breach charge as opposed to a new reported charge. So we saw success in that initiative. But yes, that is something we track and think of creative ways to tackle that.
Thank you for that. You actually answered the second part of the question, which, and I'm Inspector Gooseneff's here. Thanks for that. That was my curiosity regarding proactive slash hotspot, just because my eyes were opened by that at the conference regarding the sort of saying, you're here.
Yep. Yeah, focused deterrence. Yeah. Yeah, so the project that we designed is very similar from that, those focused deterrence and kind of that procedurally just visit, as well as there's the integrated offender management project in Alberta that has shown really good research impact. That one is a very full system approach, and at the time that was just not feasible. We figured we'd start small and see where we go. So yeah, that all is based on various research projects.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I have a few questions. One, yes, follow up.
Thanks, Chair. And then, yeah, as just a quick follow-up to that, again, we expect that in-house initiative and experience. We saw great value there, and that is one of those areas that we are targeting. We're seeing return on investment if you put proactive resources targeting high harm offenders, recidivists. We're seeing notable reductions. That is one of the things that's a spoiler alert.
Can you put up number 18 for me, please? These are significant numbers. What data do we have that the harm just hasn't shifted from? So it's down 48% in the hotspot that we identified.
Yep.
Yeah, but it's up 62%.
In a different address. Yep. So that's something that Sam monitors, and we monitor a lot through our mapping technology. And so that's why I note we haven't seen a single address come up to the harm level of the baselines of these that we selected. So when we monitor, we have not seen displacement. We also haven't seen any area absorb that harm to become as high and as kind of nasty looking as our original selections. So that is something we continuously monitor, and Sam will keep an eye if all of a sudden we're seeing an address jump up or a hexagon or an area jump up, especially if it's in close proximity to our harm locations. But we haven't been seeing that over the last couple of years, or else what we have done is added something into our harm spot location. So we had 7, but there's been 2 or 3 addresses that have kind of come and gone since then, but nothing to the significance of when we first started. So we're not seeing basically any new harm spots pop up at the severity of our original ones. We do see harm continue at these locations, but at a lower amount. And we do see kind of those one-offs if there was a very targeted incident that happened in a location, but we continuously monitor that.
I think that's significant. The reductions that we're seeing. And my last is the comment that maybe in the future, a future meeting, Chief, maybe we get a report on from an operational perspective, what exactly do we do? I know some of it you may not be able to disclose to the public, of course, but as a result of this information, operationally, I think we as a group here have a pretty good understanding, but the general public may not. What does this mean from an operational perspective? Maybe that a presentation at a future meeting of value. Say, okay, this is the data. This is what we've done, and then these are also.
Absolutely, Chair. Yeah, I think we can give that more of a narrative. Well, some of those operational people can explain that too.
Any other questions? Wonderful. We always look forward to the update, and I'm happy to see that statistics are showing that we are doing a good job, and that are changing how we police. So, and we look forward to hearing from you, I guess, probably in the new year.
Yes, we'll see you in January with that fun operational report. Thank you.
Thanks again. And Sean, I should have brought this up on the original agenda for today. We did have a downtown deployment presentation as a follow-up to last month's. We had to move it to next month as a budget. So Senior Command has put together a presentation as a follow-up, and it's been moved to our November meeting. There are 2 items in today's consent agenda: our professional standards report and human resources report. Would any member like one of those pulled, or any questions? Seeing none, a motion to approve. Thank you. Back over to you, Chief Johnson and Turner, to give us an update on our 2026 operational and capital budget.
Thank you, Chair. And I will hand it over to Ty. Again, recognizing that we're always trying to be as upfront and transparent as possible with our community, as well as the board, in terms of the challenges that this organization face in a growing city with a population that continues moving forward.
Good morning. Yeah, the chief is going to speak to kind of the need and the value of our growth plan and additional resources shortly, but we just wanted to start with the pure kind of growth and numbers perspective. So what we've kind of showcased here in relation to what we talked about last time with our COP to POP is just what those additional resources would mean for our COP to POP, kind of projecting to 2030. So we've used our authorized strength numbers, and you can see that our COP to POP, the blue line there at the bottom, obviously would decrease from 2023 to 2025, knowing that we kind of maintain that 250 authorized complement. However, going forward, adding the 6 additional resources up until 2030 would pretty much kind of stabilize our POP rate. And that really is just a calculation that the growth in those sworn officers would equal about 2.4%. And our projected population growth is kind of in line with that. So those would kind of marry up and then we would kind of stabilize. We've also showcased the top for the province of Ontario and Canada wide as well. Those are 2023 data, so we don't have updated information, but we've kind of just extended that forward to showcase that kind of gap that exists today and could potentially. Just kind of going back to what we showed last time, our calls for service the past 5 years, so from 2020 to 2024, have increased about 4% per year. So the additional 6 would be an increase of about 2.4%. So we'd still be kind of below just that growth in what I'll call demand. And then that demand wouldn't account for just about like the changing scope of the request for the police, the complexity, potential areas of enforcement. We also just wanted to mention, obviously there's a correlation with additional resources and overtime. So we've seen the benefit of that this year with the additional resources through the replacement of the WSIB members that our shift supplement overtime is actually decreased. Right? So there's that kind of correlation. And then just generally the positive impact on wellness of having the additional members to help kind of pick up that workload. Just the gap that I mentioned there with technologies and efficiencies, that is just the gap between the increased demand and then the additional resources. So the thought there is that we would be able to manage that gap by the investments that we're making in technology, the efficiencies that we're finding, and some of that information that we was able to share at this time. And the chief will speak to kind of the targeted areas for the additional resources.
Thanks, Ty. Before I just speak to the intimate partner violence, I do want to reference back to Madison's presentation and just our high farm team in when we were looking at when the board asked for a growth plan and where we would be looking to direct those growth resources where we would see the best return on investment. Looking to put potential two new members there with direct impact on those in our community that are responsible disproportionately for a great deal of harm. In addition to running our own internal experiment with respect to, a 6-month pre-post and a drastic reduction in harm being caused by the individuals who had visits monthly by the team. That high farm team has been dedicated to the GPS monitoring those individuals in our community that have GPS monitors to current visits, as well as the bail dashboard with firearm offenses, those from both within Barrie out as well as from across Ontario that reside within Barrie, doing compliance checks and ensuring that everyone is abiding by the conditions as set by the court. And so there is some great value there, and that is part of our strategic plan, looking at creating making our community safer. Specifically for the intimate partner violence, again, our strat plan speaking to addressing victims of crime and to do better at it. But certainly we recognize the complexity of intimate partner violence, as has our city. And just the reality in policing today is that what was not a relatively straightforward, but in terms of a process, has become increasingly complex with more challenges, requirements, but also how we deal with those individuals who suffer. So our investment in working with our victims of crime, in particular intimate partner violence, has been a focus of this organization, and that was with the other area where we were looking at focusing dedicated resources. And Ty is going to go back to the numbers in terms of particular officer and civilian makeup.
Please.
Just for clarification, is the time per call, what is that measured in? Thank you.
Yeah, we just have two slides here. So one is kind of the costing for sworn and civilian with them starting kind of in the summer months, the July 1st date we had talked about. And then the following slide is kind of the fall start, or October 1st date. So we've just identified the cost per individual sworn officer and per individual civilian role for both summer and fall. We also included a report in the board package that kind of presents some different options or scenarios, kind of going from the 0 to the full recommendation of the 6 sworn, 4 civilian. And we can jump ahead the final slides here as well. So this is kind of where we're at today with the total budget. So that is inclusive of our last recommendation of the 6 sworn and 4 civilian with a fall start date. Obviously, the board can select anything in between that, and we can kind of update what that calculation would possibly be. But essentially, what we're kind of considering the Barrie police portion of the 2026 budget is kind of that baseline 5.88%. We would add on the impact from the additional growth plan and resourcing. That would give us kind of our total Barrie police impact. Then we still have the 2.65%, which are coming directly from the province and the Community Safety and Policing Act, the reduction in the port security and prisoner transportation, and those other elements as well. Then we just made 2 quick notes there on the bottom, just to give the board an idea of what some of the other services are experiencing, recognizing that we're our own service, but for 2025 of kind of our group of services of 22 services, the average budget increase last year was 9.68%. Our budget increase was 6.99% for 2025. And for this year, of the 13 that we kind of know about at this point, that percentage is over 9%, but we're still kind of early in that budget process. So some of those numbers will change, and then some of those numbers will become public as we go through the next couple of months as well.
Other questions, please. Clarity, on the 2.65 Ontario impact. I think I'm reading it right. There's 3 sections, next gen 911, WSIB, and then the courts. Can you break down the 2.65 in those 3 categories?
Yeah, so out of the 2.65, so 1.73% of that is directly related to the reduction in court security and prisoner transportation costs. So that's entirely related to courts. The difference of the 0.92 that makes up that total provincial bucket is what we would kind of prove for all of our legislative impacts. Those are basically the 3 that you mentioned. The biggest one out of that 0.92 would be the the Community Safety and Policing Act. That's about 0.64% of the 0.92. Next one would be NG 911, and then the WSIB methods. That helps.
Just real quick math, 1.73 is about 650.
So 1% is about 722,000. So I think it's about $1.3 million in total impact.
Further question?
Thanks, Chair. Chief, I'll appreciate if you could take us away. Just trying to draw a comparison. I'm trying to measure. I'm trying to make things apples and apples and understand the impact. Last week we saw a presentation of Service Southwest that actually, by prescription of their board or their operations, they don't respond to certain calls with boots on the ground. They do some response purely administratively below a certain threshold of harm or impact. Is that feasible? What would that look like? How would that change our service delivery to our community? Is that a lightning rod, or is that even something that is worth considering?
Through you, Chair, certainly a lightning rod for a whole host of reasons. Again, I don't want to hear context. Western Canada, a little different than here. I just think there's some community expectations where someone's contacting the police, depending upon, and there are times where it is actually factually not a police matter, and we will advise them of an appropriate resource, i.e. Bylaw infraction and bylaws working, and that is redirected versus, no, we recognize that this is X offense, but it doesn't meet our organization criteria. We won't be coming. There's a bit of a challenge there. And even redirecting them, I think there's greater value there, certainly, and we have explored virtual calling, but for different reasons. It's less about yes, it has the impact of reducing service usage, but the reality is it's a different version of trying to meet the community where they're at. Some people would prefer to do it virtually. Some people would prefer to do it online versus having, waiting for an officer that is available to show up and then take a full report. But the reality is, that may take quite a while if it's not an emergency situation or any particular violence associated to it. You're going to be waiting a bit, depending upon the time, day, and location. So I mean, we can certainly look at it, but at the end of the day, it's one of those where the community expectations of this organization is that if they call us and they really need us in this emergency, that we're coming as fast as we can. And we do endeavor to do that. For other matters, I think there's a tolerance there, but I think, and I will not speak on behalf of the community, I think there's an expectation that, should an offense occur, that the police are not simply going to say, we just don't cover that anymore. Because it still technically falls within policing.
Right. We're seeing comparisons on the slides here. We're seeing national, we're seeing provincial, we're seeing other services, et cetera. And I think if we're going to have that conversation, we need to have that conversation in order to fully understand what we're comparing. And I personally agree. I think our community has an expectation, a certain comfort level, and I found that rather interesting, to say the least, that was actually a methodology that they employed. But I really wanted to understand what would that look like in our community. So, like I said, I'll leave it with you if there's any further follow up, maybe to look at that. The second way of looking at it, which was discussed in our last meeting, was: is there an item that the service can identify in the current budget that would be a one-time impact or expenditure for 2026 that could then offset or be offset by deferring hiring by 1 year? What would that look like? And I looked in the report, I didn't quite see anything jump out at me that answered that question.
So through you, Chair, annually, and literally annually. So once, however this process plays out, the day after this process plays out, start doing budget for the following, or the next year. And that begins with collecting all the information and meeting with all the different areas of the organization. And we look at not kicking the can down the road, but what can be deferred, effectively deferred. But at some point, as an organization, there's we've done, I don't know how many meetings we had before we came to a number, and then had more meetings, and then came to a, and again, we continually go over and over, and we push off what we can. And I don't mean push off responsibly and effectively, where we can, can we make it another year without purchasing X? But when you look at staffing itself, that's a little different. And I want to reflect that we've seen growth in this city, and we're just looking at, as an organization, how do we best address those growth challenges? And I don't know if, we're looking at the ask of the organization, what does a growth strategy look like? This is what we think. But we don't have that crystal ball. So this is what we believe. is an effective growth strategy.
If I may, I'd like to summarize where we're at in this process. The base budget, no net new employees, no sworn, no civilian, zero increase in sworn, zero in civilian. That's is 8.53. So, right, 8.53. No net new officers or civilians. That's 5.88 in our base budget plus 2.65 provincial legislative requirements. So we're at 8.53, no net new. I think the board, certainly senior command, we need to move the needle further. It's just whether we do it this budget or the next budget. If we go to 6 sworn, 4 civilian with the summer start, that 8.53 grows to 10.43. If we go to 6 sworn, 4 civilian with a fall start, that number goes to 9.87. In between those numbers, we have various options. So it's 0, 0, 6, 4. Then, we can do 2, 1, 4, 3, 6, 4, 0, 0. Question, we spend a lot of time on personnel. Well, it's 92% of our budget. That's why we're spending the time. So the question for the board is, what do we want to see in our recommended budget to council?
Chair, just for clarification though, if we're looking at the base and then the two options of starting this year or next year, we're looking at approximately 1.5 to 1.9%, which is within our control. The rest is actually we're committed to. So we're debating that 1.5 to 1.9 right now, just for the sake of public understanding. When we go to city saying we need 10%, that's plus or minus.
So please.
Thank you, Chair. And I guess I just wanted to provide some, I have some questions and some comments around the growth strategy and the hiring of new officers and how we've come to that decision and why that's in front of us today. And when I joined the board, there was this strategy that said that we should have 250 sworn officers. And we worked to get to that point. But what I haven't seen us do is project out in a fulsome way where we should be in the future. And I kind of come at this, my bias is like a land use planning perspective. That the area that I deal with most of my day to day. And when we look at forecasting out in other areas, like in terms of, servicing for the city, water, wastewater, even building community centers, schools, things like that. Like we look at, okay, what's the population going to be until at 2051? And then what resources are we going to need? And then how do we roll that back to make sure that we're applying the appropriate resources to get to that point? And I feel like we're missing that in this discussion. Like we're saying, okay, this year we'll take this many officers and then we'll take that many officers, but I'm not seeing that longer term planning, which is something that I like. And I feel that we keep showing this default slide, and I just don't see that has a lot of bearing on our community. I don't see the value in that slide from an evidence-based research perspective. Like we have 250 sworn. We have a very safe city. We have reduced this presentation. We're reducing harm in front. This is great. We're doing great work. That's survey. So we see other municipalities that have more police per person, and from the news, anecdotally, I can say that those communities have higher heart and more crime, but like they have more police. So like it doesn't add up for me in terms of, oh, because we have this much population, we should have this many officers. I think like part of strategically what we should do is because we are employing all of these strategies and tactics in a very thoughtful way based on research, based on evidence, so that we are lowering harms, lowering, creating a safer city, then we should try to translate that into our overall growth strategy for the service. I feel like because we are making such an investment and such a thoughtful investment in the way that we operate our service from a strategic point of view, that we should carry that through. And I think that we're falling short. I feel like we're doing ourselves a disservice on this particular matter because we haven't applied the as much thoughtfulness, evidence, research into how many officers we should have more and how many civilians as we need for everything else. And I totally and completely appreciate wanting to put more officers on the high harm tickets and having more emphasis there. That's a strategic priority. That's yielding results. That makes a lot of sense. Having more officers focused on intimate partner violence. Again, that is strategic priority of the organization. The reason why it takes more time on those calls is because we're doing better work. It's not because it's worse, because it's better. That's what the research tells us. Like we engage in a lot of training for our officers. So we know that if we spend more time, we're more likely to get convictions. We are more likely to stop these cycles. And we're also having a positive impact on other generations, like especially if children are impacted pieces. So again, that's like prevention, that's hard to measure, but I think that's there. So I guess all of this is to say that I think that we've put together very good budget. I think that we're using resources well at very good service. We definitely have some provincial legislative challenges that are underfunded and haven't been able to deal with those very well in terms of housing funds from the province and not we, I don't think the province has provided the resources that we need for the legislative requirements that we have. But again, I go back to the addition of officers and the growth strategies, and I just don't feel like we've seen that strategy as forward. And so I have a hard time just saying like, okay, let's just continue to increase the complement and continue to see the city's growing. I would, and I know we asked for some information, we've got some information. I just feel like this organization has the capacity to give us a lot better information than what we've seen so far.
Before I open it up for other questions, yeah, I'll just elaborate on that. There's lots of things that affect our sworn complement or what it should be. It's not just cop to pop, it's geography, it's the crime index. There are many, many factors that would determine what the city of Barrie should have in terms of a sworn complement, not just the cop to pop. In going through this process, I'm with Ms. Strong in that we need to do that analysis, detailed analysis, see population growth, complexity of calls, number of calls, geography, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that would say, and then that needs to, in my opinion, be somewhat independently reviewed. Yes, this is, recommendation should be, you should be X number of sworn officers based on these 8 criteria that are standardly used to determine the size of a police service. We haven't received that. Other questions?
So through you, Chair, to the chief, and I certainly don't want to let the cat out of the bag prematurely, but I know that the service is exploring potential for some new technology and how that technology may assist in terms of response time or gaining better intelligence on how to deploy, how many resources are required, et cetera. And it's in the news. I know that even the premier has mentioned that he'd like to redeploy cameras for crime fighting purposes, et cetera. I'm not suggesting that that's where we're going. I'm suggesting that these are conversations that are being had in the spirit of providing better information, et cetera. Is any potential investment that we may be looking at, can that be factored into how, how we may be better served in terms of resource deployment? So if we have another month before we need to give a decision finally to, or recommendation to the city, does a month give you and your team any opportunity to provide us with additional information, knowing what future strategies we may or may not be investing in terms of a long-term forecast?
Through you, Chair. So we are looking, we're always looking at new technologies, as you're well aware with, for example, the virtual calling, online reporting, but certainly ways in which we can more effectively deliver the service. And I'm unapologetic in terms of a willingness to explore with our city partners, access to cameras, automated license plate readers. Certainly, we're not turning our heads or putting them in the sand with respect to AI and its usage and its potential positive usage, but only after rigorous evaluation and transparency with our community. And that's down the road. Now, down the road, that length of time that's dependent, but you're certainly going to be upfront and transparent with our community about what we want to do, why we want to do it, and how we're going to go about doing it. And we're going to be, if we get to that point, the signs are going to be massive, advising the community why we're doing what we're doing, how we're doing it. But in terms of recognizing that, in terms of efficiency or effectiveness, that, I couldn't say, a month, I don't know yet. I know there is some research out there that, has shown great promise, but context matters. And our city it's not massive, but it's not small either. So again, the use of drones with lessons from the Transport Canada, there's a whole host of things that we can explore. Again, that's first we have to go to the community and what their expectations are, what their in terms of our explanation of why we want to use them and how we're going to use them. So I know we like a quick answer. I don't have that in terms of whether that would translate in. If the question is, do we not need people instead of that? Technology is never a game changer. Never. What is our use of it. But all we are people. So at the end of the day, it's a people organization. So that is always going to be the building block of everything else.
Anyone else? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. If there's other questions, I would have a motion. So if other people have questions regarding the budget right now, I would allow that prior to. So I'll leave that up to you.
Any further questions at this stage? Motion, please.
I'm just with all the conversation in the report today. I'd like to move a motion that we approve an 8.53 budget, no staffing. If we receive provincial funding, we would add the money to a reserve for sworn officers, and a full growth report be reviewed and brought in for budget along the lines of what we were asking for, the peer review of all the reasons, because I'm a little bit concerned by the number we picked. Maybe it's 10 officers we need, but I think if we had supporting documents, since we show the public, why the growth strategy and why we need this budget. So I'd like to, and I don't know if it would be tie or if it would be all of the stuff in there, not only myself, reaching out to them, this organization and help with the picture thing.
Yeah, I just say that for that, I guess, communication to the province and shortfall, that's what the question is related to. So we did submit feedback to the budget cycle for the province, and we kind of highlighted, various areas where we were kind of falling short on the funding side. So we've been we've done that 2 years in a row where we've actually prepared like a formal written advocacy letter back to the province to kind of highlight some of the shortfalls.
Seconder for the motion. It's not. So nothing. Chief, please. It's on the table.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Chair. And we also did meet with Attorney General and on 2 separate occasions, making sure that our concerns and needs were expressed. And I recognize I'm not to speak to that motion, just if it's possible that can be considered. And I understand sworn personnel are incredibly vital to public safety. If there was reimbursement in any way, shape, or form, potential to use that being left to the organization in terms of what that makeup would look like. So if we could be using officers or civilians, only because it depends on we were able to go to justice one.
I think the motion is that it would go into reserve, but if you go into reserve, you go back out to 6 months later, if we have a report that says this is what we should do. So I think it's a little bit of both. It would go into a reserve. And then the second question would be, do we want to allocate out of that reserve today, tomorrow, or 2 years from now based on more information? Is that fair, Deputy Mayor? Yeah, so I think we're talking the same thing, but they are 2 questions. The motion would be, no, it goes into a reserve. And then obviously senior command would have the right to say, okay, it's in the reserve. We need it. This is why. And then the board would make a decision. Is that a fair summary?
Just one question. I remember, and I can't remember the year, but the court services were downloaded to the municipality. Is that correct?
Yes, but please don't ask me the year. Oh,
Or I do. I think I know kind of the year, but I'm not going to say it because I hope it was. So, what is the total cost? This is the shortfall. What is the total cost of our service providing that service in our community?
So the total court cost is about, I'll say 5.3 million. For what we're expecting for funding through the Court Security and Prisoner Transportation grant for 2026 is about 2.3 million. So the gap is roughly 3 million. However, the increase in the gap from 25 to 26 is what is ending up as an impact on the 2026 budget at 1.73% or 1.3 million is kind of the increase in the gap, but the total gap as of our current numbers is about $3 million.
Just to follow up, so if it was uploaded to the province, would we see a reduction in our budget?
So if all of the costs and all of the funding was removed, then we would essentially benefit by about $3 million.
So like, if, for example, we provide a service and at the end of every month, it's a billing invoice or whatever man hours or like officer hours. So we would probably see an increase of about 3 million. Okay, thanks.
No, thanks, Chair. And just as a follow-up to that, of that service that's being provided, we have a previous detail, but I can't remember what the percentage is in terms of what geographic region is consuming most of that service that we're providing. It's outside Barrie or inside Barrie. ethics, et cetera, prisoners that we're managing.
So the question is sort of complex because the Barrie Courthouse doesn't just deal with criminal matters. There's family court, small claims court, civil court, and a host of factors. Now, if we were in it, so it's unfair, but if we were just to look at the criminal matters, the Barrie Police Service make up 40% of that, with the bulk coming from South Simcoe in the OPP areas. So, but that's just criminal. And then, so civil, family, those other courts, again, that's all Simcoe County. So that there's a host, and potentially the province could move a trial into your area or not, depending upon where a judge decide to host. So, I mean, there's a host of factors there, but just on the criminal, we're 40%.
And just follow up, that number that you're talking about includes court security, but also prisoner transport.
So the Ontario Provincial Police are part of that transport that they deliver. That's a service that they do provincially. But for the court itself, is the funding we get of that 5 million, we're getting the funding to address just for the court, not the actual. Except for, and I apologize, except for the young offenders that we have to transport.
Any further questions on the motion? All those in favor? We'll conclude the budget presentation and we'll move forward to drafting our package for council's consideration. And also obviously a note that the board expects to see a comprehensive review of growth strategy sometime in 2026. Sticking with the budget, I'll speak to this, Deputy. In the budget, I think there are 9 frontline vehicles that we require. And obviously the budget is yet to be presented to, certainly not approved by council. However, it is extremely important from an operational perspective that we get both our name in the queue for these vehicles. So historically, we have approved the submission to the manufacturer for 9 vehicles in advance, and the cost would be $542,800 for those vehicles. So the motion, I'd like to someone move that we approve. So moved. Deputy Mayor Thompson, a second, and the question.
Thank you. And the question is, given the motion that we just had, we need 9.
The answer is yes. What we've done is actually we've started to stretch the life cycle of vehicles just because of the introduction of hybrids and the electric vehicles. So we've actually made our fleet more efficient, and we're at the point where we're starting to see the benefits of that. But we're also at the point where we have to start rolling some of them out to then get rid of the. What we're trying to do is get rid of the last full fuel vehicles. So not hybrid vehicles, which would have some, and we've stretched those basically to the limit for that. So the idea is the police vehicles being brought in would be the hybrid model, and we're going to benefit from that going forward because we've already seen that. That's
Any further questions on it? Those in favor? Thank you. Chief Johnston, back to you for your monthly update to the board and the community. Please.
Chair, board, thank you once again for this opportunity. You and our community of Pride, just a few things our members have been up to over the last few months, or the last month in our city. The roll here first. So on September 20th, auxiliary and our citizens on patrol members attended strides that hosted by Mothers Against Drunk Driving, Simcoe County. September 21st, We're very pleased with present at the Shacks World, then the Creaky Damau down at Shacks World, the community center, where our Indian community showed up and a wonderful time was had by all. September 23rd, we attended the 2025 Special Olympics Unified Champion Schools Barrie School Qualifiers. Our members attended a blood drive on the 24th of September. On the September 30th, we recognized the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation and had an opportunity to speak with our Indigenous and broader community at Spirit Catcher. On September 27th, our organization participated in the Doors Open Barrie. 200 visitors came through. October 6th, we attended the symposium on homelessness at St. Mary's Parish and spoke to how we are working with different community partners to support those experiencing homelessness. On October 8th, our community safety and well-being members helped pick up donations from Grace United to be shared throughout our community. So busy month for sure. On Thursday, September 25th, 16 runners from the Barrie Police Service joined the National Peace Officers Memorial Run. Over the next 3 days, our members, along with hundreds of others from police services across the country, ran 460 kilometers from Toronto to Ottawa, arriving ahead of the National Peace Officers Memorial Ceremony on Sunday, September 28th. It's the largest number of runners we've ever had from our service. 3 days of running, even in relay format, is no easy feat. More than a few aching muscles and missing toenails. But our members were honored to participate and honor and remember fallen officers. Even though there are 20 panels of glass at Parliament Hill, and there are 912 names of on that. September 23rd, some of the meetings and partnerships we had. September 23rd, we had our mini strategic planning day with our internal members. So certainly more of an operational focus and input from our members. September 29th, we had our strategic plan focus group with our community partners. Again, we are looking to get voices from all aspects of our community. October 1st, we had a visit from MPP Cirillo, Parliamentary Assistant to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General, Doug Downey, where we had a great conversation, and I alluded to that earlier. That's one of two conversations. October 6th, I was in a willing interview with Barrie City on the Move, with board member Con with Rogers, so thank you for that. Good. October 8th to the 10th, we were hosting agency with the Building Bridges Evidence-Based Policing Conference and launch of 30 Forward Canada. October 14th, representatives from the Sarnia Police Service visited our headquarters for a tour and information on the facility. As well, we had visitors from Brantford Police to see how we're leveraging our data and doing some of the work that we are doing. A couple of notes, investigative notes. So on September 22nd, a 27-year-old male from Toronto was facing a number of criminal charges, including dangerous operation of a motor vehicle, flight from a peace officer, and assaulting a peace officer with a weapon. The driver was observed several times driving in an extremely unsafe manner, but every time police attempted to stop the vehicle, it fled at high rates of speed. The vehicle was located at a residence in Barrie, Southeast End. The driver again fled at a high rate of speed, reversing the vehicle and striking an unmarked police vehicle, which sustained significant damage. The ongoing investigation concluded the following day after the accused attended the Barrie Police headquarters and surrendered to police. September 25th, just before 10:30 p.m., Barrie Police, along with the Barrie Fire and Emergency Services, responded to a report of an active fire inside a building located at 75 Bradford Street in the city of Barrie. The building, which had previously served as a sales pavilion, was filled with dense smoke, and although attempts were made to enter and search for anyone who may be in it, police were able to call out, which resulted in a lone male exiting from the abandoned structure. A 31-year-old male was arrested for break and enter and mischief under 5,000. He was transported to Barrie Police headquarters where the investigation continued. On October 7th, part of an ongoing investigation which began in late November 2024 by the Barrie Police Services Human Trafficking Unit, included in North Bay after a 33-year-old male was taken into custody. Detectives from the Services Human Trafficking Unit were assisted throughout this complex investigation by the Provincial Human Trafficking Intelligence-led Joint Forces Strategy, the IJFS, we like our acronyms, and during the arrest by North Bay Police Service. The male, who was in possession of a loaded firearm at the time of his arrest, is facing numerous charges related to weapons, drugs, and human trafficking. Barrie Police Services has had a full-time partnership with the Canadian Mental Health Association Simcoe County branch since 2019, which pairs a crisis worker with a police officer. The MCERT grant, enhancement grant, will allow for implementation of the City Core Mobile Rapid Response Team, a dedicated team that will be based in downtown Barrie. The BPS City Core team is comprised of Constable Guy Peters as well as CMHA worker, crisis worker Crystal. By working together, the officer and crisis worker, who is a subject matter expert in the field of mental health, will co-respond to emergent person in crisis calls for service. The City Core team's responsibility is to enhance crisis support by responding to calls for service and providing on-scene assessment for immediate specialized intervention specific to mental health, person in crisis, and/or addictions, recognizing this as an alternative response to our traditional multiple units going to a call. So we see great value there. Just a little more of the highlight of our conference on October 8th to the 10th workshop, as well as a 2-day conference with just under 350 attendees, approximately 50 speakers, with attendees from the Netherlands, UK, US, Australia, as well as across Canada. And I personally would like to thank Victoria, Jenna, and team for their weeks of effort, longer than months of effort, to produce such a well-received event. Edmonton Police will be hosting next year. I believe it's Banff or Kansas, so looking forward to that. 30 Forward initiative was also launched at the conference, with the Barrie Police Service being one of the first to sign the pledge. 30 Forward is an international initiative dedicated to building a more inclusive future that focuses on recruiting and retaining women in the services ranks. Derived from the Global 30 by 30 pledge, which commits to increasing women's representation to 30% in organizations by 2030. The 30 Forward pledge looks beyond the next 5 years. It's tailored for Canadian police services that value a fair and inclusive workforce that better reflects communities they serve. Backed by research, 30 Forward initiative is about more than just simple recruitment numbers. It includes commitments to retention, mentorship, and providing research resources. By signing this pledge, we commit to taking action to recruit, retain, and advance women in policing, while we're continuing to ensure our workplace culture is one which is inclusive and supportive for everyone. Tuesday, October 14th, the Barrie Community Safety and Satisfaction Survey was launched for 2025. This is an annual online survey that is confidential and voluntary to complete. The survey asks for your input on public safety, Barrie Police approachability, visibility, and resources. This is an important tool for data collection that helps the Barrie Police Service identify areas where crime prevention initiatives could be further explored, implemented, or improved. Findings serve as a measurable benchmarks to assess year-over-year progress and alignment with community needs, and informs the progress of the Barrie Police Service strategic plan. Results are reported to the Barrie Police Services Board in the first quarter of each year. Findings are also highlighted in the Barrie Police Services annual report. Feedback from the 2025 survey is informing ongoing and new Barrie Police Service initiatives. Please visit our website, barriepolice.ca/survey, to access the link. We would strongly encourage the community to attend that website and just take the time to complete the survey. The voice matters. It's just we need more people to fill it out, so we have a better idea how people are feeling and what they're thinking. Lastly, just some upcoming events. It's that time of year already. November 15th is the Santa Claus Parade in the city of Barrie. So we will be participating as well. We will also be participating with November 22nd, a Holiday with a Hero. And with that, Chair, I will hand it back to you.
Thanks very much, Chief. Before I hand it over for questions, I'd like to provide a comment, if I may. Myself, along with Member Strong and Tom, attended the the building bridges conference last week that was hosted by the Barrie Police Service. As you mentioned, there was over 350 participants from around the world. And it was a world-class event. The words world-class are not mine. They were what were conveyed to me. The service did an outstanding job through your leadership, but I know there's strong team did an outstanding job, and they made the service extremely proud to show that we are leaders in evidence-based policing, but more importantly, that we're looking for opportunities to do better. That I think is the main reason for that conference, and see what other services around the world are doing in terms of meeting their obligations. See, so I want to congratulate you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to echo your comments on the evidence-based policing conference and thank all of the organizers and all of the participants. And it really was world-class, great conference. So many interesting presentations, exceptional speakers, and really nice to see how Barrie is on the map internationally as a leader in evidence-based policing, how well respected our services internationally, and just what a positive case this is for the city of Barrie as a whole to have this kind of global recognition for our policing efforts. I thought it was incredible, and I learned so much in the 3 days that I was there. And again, wanted to extend my heartfelt thanks to everyone who was involved in
Any other questions? Other than Mr. Khan would just echo the last two comments, I think, participant. Any questions for the chief? Thanks very much, Chief, for your update. I would entertain a motion to move in camera in accordance with section 44(1)B and section 44(1)D of the Community Safety Policing Act to deal with legal and contractual matters. We will move in camera then. Our next regular meeting is November the 20th, 2025. And just to advise those present that we will not be going back. This concludes our open. Thanks, everyone.